Hello, everyone, and welcome to the UW School of Social Work Social Service Experience Form Guide. We're really just going to take some time today to really explain the form and then also our tips and tricks to completing it. Okay, so I'm Summer, she, her pronouns. I'm currently a second year day student in the Community Center Integrative Practice Specialization, and I am also one of the student information specialists.
And my name is Maura. I am a first year day student and I am the other student information specialist.
And if at any point after this you have any more questions about the form, please feel free to reach out via our emails for questions, as well as schedule an appointment with us on our website.
So today we're going to go a little more in depth into the Social Work and Human Services Experience form. That's a required part of the application process. So this is a little screenshot of the form and what it looks like. As you're going through it, you want to calculate the total hours per week you completed at this job or volunteer experience and the total overall, and then you're going to describe how that experience relates to social work practice. And it might feel a little time consuming, especially considering that we do have a required resume as well, but it is a critical part of our application process. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what qualifies or could qualify as relevant experience.
Yeah, so as Maura just described, since you do have a lot of space to really take the time to explain the different experiences that you had, what actually counts as social experience is actually very broad. We just also offer this guide just in case people do need a little more guidance, but essentially social work and social work experience is essentially any activity that is aimed to promote the welfare of others, and then services that improve the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. Some folks like to break down their experience across maybe micro, meso, and macro practice, especially if they're having a hard time really coming up with how their experience is relating to social work. So for example, some macro practices may be looking at things like research and advocacy work. Maybe some meso practices working in schools and community groups, doing community organizing, things like that. Then of course, more micro things, looking at your stereotypical things when you think about social work. So direct practice activities, maybe working on a crisis line, outreach, more of that one-to-one in-person volunteer or work experience. Then also, since UW's mission is closely aligned to uplifting the voices of underrepresented communities, as well as being an anti-racist organization, we really also do value unpaid and paid experience that is directly serving marginalized groups. So as you can see here, some examples of those service populations include, but are not limited to, LGBTQ folks, immigrants, refugees, non-citizens, communities of color, as well as individuals living with mental or physical disabilities, because again, these populations are really groups that we need to center in our social work practice. Yeah, so now just moving into some examples of basically what we put on our form, just so you all have some examples of essentially what you're going to be doing. So as you can see here, for both of these experiences that I had, even though they were unpaid, they were super critical to forming like why I wanted to go to graduate school, and especially why I'm in the concentration that I'm in now. So as you can see, I essentially on the left side listed the dates I was working. I calculated the total hours per week, and then the total hours I spent doing my activity. And as you can see, since both of these experiences are a little bit different, I explain them in different ways. So for my first experience as a clinical undergraduate intern, my job activities every single day were pretty clear and direct. So it was really easy to say, like, I attended weekly 2-hour trainings and did things where I practiced with groups and had different experiences that were very direct practice, because I knew exactly the type of activities I had from day to day. Then for my second experience that I listed, it was really important for me to include this as an example, because it was much harder to really reflect and describe my experience as a student community engager, since so much of that work was happening in community spaces and more based on conversations and kind of just themes that arise in the moment. I just took the time to really, instead of kind of explaining the experience, more kind of setting the framework for what we are using in our collaborative community-based classroom. So here you can see I use words like work directly with the Detroit community by engaging in discussions and brainstorming about policy reform and strategies to challenge unequitable development in the city. So as you can see here, I'm not exactly saying the exact activities we were doing since it was a little bit more open-ended, but as you can see, you can have both the space to have more direct, clearly outlined experiences and also room to explain maybe experiences that could get a little bit more challenging and harder to explain.
And here's a couple of things that I put on my form. Again, the same general format with the dates of the position, the hours per week, and then the total hours. So one of my positions that I put down was a youth advocate role at an LGBT center in my hometown. I put that down and wanted to show you all because it was a paid position that was extremely important to me deciding what I wanted to do when going into social work, but it also speaks to working with specific underrepresented communities and working one-on-one with clients through a community organization. And then the other role that I put down was actually a student assistant in an admissions office. And it really relates to the educational part of social work and the emphasis being put on education and outreach for educating for youth. So working on one-on-one with youth or in small groups about their application processes, and also interacting with different organizations on a community level, whether that be middle schools, high schools, youth-oriented community organizations, and communicating with them about education and helping them through some of that process. So those are two of the things that I put. And as you can see, people will have varied experience, and it's really important to kind of look and think how your experience does relate to social work practice, because when you sit and reflect on it, you might connect it to something on our guide that you didn't think it connected to previously.
Yeah, so now that you've seen our examples, we're just going to give you a couple of recommendations, like as Maura said, that are really going to help you to reflect on your experiences so you can really describe like why you're interested in social work, like how have your experiences really been transformative in the best ways you can highlight yourself and your experience and your passions. So first, really take the time to own your experience and your passions. Although something on the surface may not seem that it's directly related to social work, if it's an experience you had, a conversation you had, a training you had, a class you had that you really think relates to your social work and your social work practice, please take the time to calculate those hours and put it on the log, because those are super valuable experience, as well as giving yourself time and grace. As Maura mentioned earlier, sometimes this can take a little bit more time to do, and it can be daunting, is often the part of the application that does take the most time. But since our application is really holistic, it's super important that we are gathering a full range of your experiences. And I think too, like it's really great just to give yourself the space and grace to really reflect on why you want to apply to this program and the experiences that have led you here.
Yeah, it's also important as you're reflecting on the work that you did to think about the specific communities and people that you've worked with. As Summer mentioned previously, we do look at the communities you work with, especially if they are traditionally underrepresented or minoritized groups. That is something that we wholeheartedly believe social work practice should focus on. So looking at the experiences you've had interacting with those groups is really important. And it's also looking at the quality of your time and experiences versus the quantity. So just because you have a lot of different roles that you think relate to social work doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing if someone else has only had a couple roles, if they are really, in-depth, detailed work, working one-on-one with communities, working specifically with marginalized communities. So really take a look at that. And I think remember that everyone is going to have a different breadth of experience. So just because you have less or more doesn't mean one thing or the other.
Yeah, and again, if you do have any questions, please take the time to set up a Zoom or phone appointment with us, as well as we have multiple different Zoom drop-in hours that are available usually on Thursdays from 12 to 2, as long as it is not a holiday. But please, of course, check our website because these drop-in hours often change as well, because we are also grad students, so our schedules do change. And please also check out our website for other recordings, info sessions, dates, and things like that, as well as our different social media platforms to see different student perspectives, student takeovers, and other things.